Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So we're reading second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, beginning the third chapter, text 8. Dharmata Uttama Slokam Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit Raksha Kama Punya Ganan Ojas Kamo Morud Ganan Dharmartha Uttama Slokam Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit Raksha Kama Punya Ganan Ojas Kamo Morud Ganan Dharma Arthak Uttama Slokam Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yatit Raksha Kama Punya Ganan Ajas Kamo Marud Ganan Dharma Arthak Uttama Slokam Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit Raksha Kama Punya Janan Ajas Kamo Marud Ganan
Uttama Shlokam.
Dharma Uttama Slokam
Tantu Tanvan Pitrin Yajit.
Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit
Raksha Kama Punya Ganan.
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Ojas Kamo Marugunan.
Ajas Kamo Marud Ganan
Dharmartha Uttama Shlokam
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Tantu Tanvan Pichrin Yaje
Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Ojas Kamo Marut Ganan
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan
Dharma Martha Uttama Shlokam.
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Tantu Tanvan Pitrin Yajit.
Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit
Raksha Kama Punya Janan.
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan.
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan
Dharmartha Uttama Shlokam
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Tandu Tanvan Pitrin Yajit
Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Ojas Kamo Marulganan
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan
Dharmartha Uttama Shlokam.
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Tantu Tanvan Pitrin Yajit.
Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit
Raksha Kama Punya Janan.
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan.
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Tantu Tanvan Pitrin Jayet
Tanchu Tanvan Pitin Yajit
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Raksha Kama Punya Janan
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan
Ojas Kamo Marud Ganan
Dharmartha Uttama Shlokam
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Tantu Tanvan Pitrin Yajet
Tantu Tanvan Patin Yajet
Raksha Kama Punyajanan
Raksha Kamo Punyajanan
Ojas Kamo Marudganan
Ojas Kamo Marudganan
Dharmartha Uttama Shlokam
Dharmartha Uttama Slokam
Tantu Tanvan Pitrin Yajit
Tantu Tanvan Patin Yajet
Raksha Kama Punyajanan
Raksha Kamo Punyajanan
Ojas Kamo Marudganan
Ojas Kamo Marudganan. So everyone chanted. Anyone online like chant? We'll do the word by word synonyms. Dharmartha for spiritual advancement. Uttama Slokam, the Supreme Lord or persons attached to the Supreme Lord. Tantu for offspring. Tanvan and for their protection. Pitrin, the residents of Pitraloka. Yajat, must worship. Rakshakama, one who desires protection. Punyak Jnanan, pious persons. Ojakama, one who desires strength, should worship. Marut Ganan, the demigods. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. One should worship Lord Vishnu or his devotee for spiritual advancement in knowledge. And for protection of heredity and advancement of a dynasty, one should worship the various demigods. Purport. The path of religion entails making progress on the path of spiritual advancement, ultimately reviving the eternal relation with Lord Vishnu and his impersonal effulgence, his localized Paramatma feature, and ultimately his personal feature by spiritual advancement and knowledge. And one who wants to establish a good dynasty and be happy in the progress of temporary body relations should take shelter of the Pitas and the demigods and other pious planets. Such different classes of worshippers of different demigods may ultimately reach the respective planets of those demigods within the universe, but he who reaches the spiritual planets in the Brahma Jyoti achieves the highest perfection. So it's stated in this verse here that if you want spiritual advancement or spiritual knowledge, then worship Lord Vishnu or his devotees. So then there's listen to a lecture on this by Dhanava Goswami in Vrindavan in 1995, and Maharaj covered some really good points on this verse. Actually, I was listening to a couple verses. I think his lecture was probably the better one I heard. And, well, they're all really good. I guess you can't compare one better than the other. But I guess it was like to the points, I guess, that we were discussing. So in Bhagavad Gita, it states that those of smaller, lesser intelligent worship the demigods for material benefits. They're enamored by the flowery words of the Vedas. In fact, the Vedas and demigod worship actually really states that in order to make one's faith steady in this worship to their particular demigod, that they make statements that this is superior, like that, you know, that they make some pretty bold statements. But when we talk about worship about Krishna, Vishnu, and Narayan, specifically for spiritual advancement, or specifically for going back to God and actually ultimately being purified, it's an actual fact. It's not just to increase one's faith in one's worship to a particular deity, but it is the fact that this is superior worship to any of the demigods, of course, is the material worship of the demigods for material benedictions. They're limited and temporary. It's also stated in Bhagavad Gita. Going up to the highest planets all the way down to the lowest, all are places of misery. wherein repeated birth and death take place. So the devotees have a special advantage. Maharaj was mentioning in class, what was it, maybe like a week or a couple of weeks ago or so, he was saying that the demigods, their Srimad Bhagavatam is like hundreds of volumes. And they've got enough time to read it, and they've got more advanced intelligence than we have got. From what I understand, Brahma's form is actually pure intelligence in the material world. So they're on the subtle basis. We can't see our mind. Our mind is governed and ruled by intelligence. And this also states in Bhagavad Gita that senses are superior to dull matter. And so it says, according to one's karma, one receives a particular set of senses grouped about the mind. So the mind is the center of all the activities. And then dull matter, of course, what we were just reading, is that the yogis, they were practicing brahmacharis since early youth, at the age of 5. And they go to school of the spiritual master, to the Gurukul, and they teach them this process of yoga, which this science specifically mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam is not known at the current day. Is that it was mentioned, merge the mind into the self and the self into the super self, who's holding a club, wheel of a chariot, conch shell, and lotus flower. Right? So this is kind of nice. We can kind of imagine this. Prabhupada was talking about in the Bhagavad Gita verse how we can feel and understand how we're not the material body. Right? That we're the consciousness. Our consciousness is a symptom of the spiritual soul. That we have perception. So dull matter doesn't perceive, but we don't say I hand, but we say my hand, like this. In fact, that was a thing that Maharaj was mentioning in the class in Vrindavan, New Vrindavan, is that the animals, they're shameless. Is that according to their lower modes in nature, is practically seeing that the dogs and the cats, they're not ashamed. They're not wearing any clothes and they have sex, right, in the open public. To them, it's completely normal and acceptable. Everybody just kind of looks the other way. Oh, how cute or whatever, right? So that's not a big deal. And but the human being does it. It's criminal. It's a criminal act. It's obscene, right? So there's a whole ritual. Maharaj was mentioning this whole ritual is the dating and the courting, and then you meet the family. So it's this whole big arrangement that's made, and then something that comes to mind, Prabhupada was saying, in New York City, there's hundreds, thousands of women, but the one man, he's attached to this one woman that this is mine, this is my wife. But if you think about it, they were complete strangers, right? Whatever our relationships were, we were complete strangers. In a lot of cases, they may have known each other, maybe when they're growing up in the same neighborhood or something, or friends of the family or something. But in a lot of cases, it's, the person, they really don't even know the person. In fact, it's like, it's kind of taboo to go out with somebody from work, like that. They kind of frown upon that, so they don't encourage it. But, except in other rare cases where things are working okay. Right, that it could be acceptable, but generally there's some problems that are associated with that. Then it ends up in Human Resources Director's office and some special handling, and if they break up, then they have ill feelings towards each other, like that. So it's disruptive to the workplace. So, but they have their potlucks and their pizza parties and their bowling parties. They used to hire the ice cream truck to come at lunchtime. You can get an ice cream from the truck, like that. So, they have the camaraderie, but showing all things very sinful. Satrup Das Maharaj was speaking how he was on the plane and everything's nice, it's comfortable, and then they they warm up the dinners, and they come out and they start serving the dinners, and there's some nice warm feelings exchanged. But he says everything's ruined. You know, here they're eating forbidden things. They're eating meat. You know, and even then they're not even like really big portions. But you know, but these were the dinners that they used to have on planes. But yeah, you can say that everything's ruined. Now they're becoming implicated in more karma. You know, the impious activities which are covering the knowledge of the spiritual self. And what Prabhupada mentions here in the purport is there's a verse in Srimad Bhagavatam that the Supreme Lord is realized as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Brahmiti, Paraman, Iti, Bhagavan, Iti Shabdate. So this, and it's known by the yogi, the philosopher, the specific adherents of the specific yoga that they're practicing. They're an impersonalist, the Mayavadi, then Krishna has his Brahman, Jyoti, effulgence, from once the impersonal Brahman. Or if the yogi meditates on Paramatma, so he realizes the Lord within the heart is also within the atom as well. And then Bhagavan, that means the possessor of all opulence, so all riches, all wealth, so all fame, all beauty, all renunciation, all knowledge. Did I mention all six? So now I mentioned wealth and yeah, okay, good. So nobody can say that he's more richer than God. Even big bank balance, the richest man in the world. When I was growing up, the richest man in the world was Howard Hughes. And then just before I joined the movement, I guess he died, right? You know, he owned Las Vegas, and he was living in a hotel in Las Vegas. But before that, they didn't know where he was. He was in seclusion. You know, they were showing some speculation. Really, really long hair. He was afraid to cut his hair. He was afraid of germs. He didn't want to cut his fingernails. You know, he was completely germophobic. But he had an accident. He had a brain, what do you call it? Yeah, well, an injury to his brain. He crashed a plane. He was performing a movie. It was called Hell's Angels, but they were the Air Force. You know, planes in the sky, the Hell's Angels. Do you have a question? Oh, concussion. Yeah, he got a concussion, but he got brain damage. And he progressively was going insane. But yeah, he got a concussion, and he had his head really bad when he crashed the plane trying to do the stunt. The stunt drivers were trying to tell him, well, this is how foolish the materialists are, you know, on a specific estimation. The stunt drivers told him that this specific scene, the way that he wanted it done, was impossible to fly. So he flew it himself and crashed. In fact, it was just off of Woodley Avenue. It was in the valley over there where I used to live, where I used to work on Woodley Avenue over by, well, there's a Budweiser plant there. They used to have bush gardens, have the boat rides, you know, show you how to make beer, you know, like that. It's a big place. So the airport hangars, they used to film some other stuff there too, like Wonder Woman. So so let's see, the point that I was making on this. Oh yeah, so yeah, the foolish materialist, but no matter how wealthy a person is, you know, even the richest man in the world, Krishna, he owns all wealth of all wealthy persons in unlimited, practically unlimited, innumerable material universes. Jai Gaur Nitai Ki Jai. And not only that, but in the material world, this is only 1/4 of the creation. So then the spiritual world is 3/4 of the creation. So that was another discussion in Maharaj's class in New Vrindavan, is that everything that exists here in the material world also exists in the spiritual world, even though there's, you know, the renunciation is that everything is for Krishna. There's nothing is done on behalf of one's own personal motive or desire. It's for the service, for the loving service of Krishna. So if there's sannyasis, but anyone there who is maturely renounced is a sannyasi, or better than a sannyasi actually, even though when they have be in the grihastha ashram and have a husband, wife, and household paraphernalia, it's desiring use for Krishna and not for one's own personal benefit, then that's a renouncer. That's a real renouncer. So it's really like, the mood of consciousness. And so I was reading further on we're in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's going to be questions by Maharaj Prisket Sukadeva Goswami. So what we're hearing now, right, to bring everybody up to speed, first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is the prelude to Srimad Bhagavatam. It explains the reason why Srimad Bhagavatam was compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, and how that came about by his instructions from Narada Muni. And so what we'll be reading about is Narada Muni receives the instructions from Brahma, who Brahma received instructions through the heart from Krishna himself, directly or personally, like that, before he creates the material universe. So then we have the history of Maharaj Parikshit. He's the nephew of Maharaj Yudhisthira and Arjuna, the Pandavas, and how he was saved by the Brahmastra weapon of Ashvatam. And then Dhritarashtra, he quits home and achieves spiritual perfection, goes back home, back to Godhead, and his wife, Gandhari, a very, very great chaste lady. She follows her husband, so she also follows her husband into the fire. And so now we have Sukadeva Goswami. The history of how Sukadeva Goswami, he is the son of Srila Vyasa, and now it came that he heard Srimad Bhagavatam. And so he arrives at the forest of Namasaranya, and is selected as a suitable person to speak, as the most advanced person of all the great sages from all over the universe. Narada Muni was also there. So there were sages not only from this planet, but sages from all over the universe were present. And so they unanimously agree that Sukadeva Goswami, he's the most appropriate to speak, and the greatest sacrifice to hear is to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. So Maharaj Prisket now, without taking a drop of water and without any food for the next 7 days, fasting on the bank of the Ganges in this way, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, or the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees in his various incarnations, manifestations. Srimad Bhagavatam contains all the Vedic conclusions, all the Vedic truths. So it's Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita that Krishna says, I am, by all the Vedas, I am to be known. And I guess the Sanskrit for this, Saveshya, Saveshtir, Aham, the verse. So, and that's another point that Maharaj was making too. Prabhupada was speaking about this in the tape. Prabhupada says, Nirmama Nirahankara. Right? This is contained within a verse in Bhagavad Gita. Further on in Srimad Bhagavatam, the Sukadeva Goswami, he's speaking, answers to Maharaj Prisket's inquiries. There's this word nirmama. Nir means negation, or nil, near. So this is not me, this body, I'm not the body, but aham brahmasmi, right? And nothing in relation to the body is actually mine. Like that. So nirmama, nirahankara, this is not me. So nothing belongs to me. And I'm not the material body. So that's so one who's a sannyasi, or one who's renounced, he works and he lives in the spirit and the mood that aham brahmasmi, and acts on a spiritual platform, that this body belongs to Krishna. Now that's what Prabhupada was saying. Nirmama Nirhankara. Nothing is mine, is not me, but everything is Krishna's, including one's own self. As that we're part and parcel of Krishna. As Sat Chit Ananda Jiva Atma, practically innumerable Jiva Atmas. And we have the same characteristics of Krishna, but in smaller degrees. So we're infinite and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No, we're finite, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is infinite. So infinite and is all possibilities and potential of when the material world is within its subtle manifestations, and then it becomes visible from Krishna's unmanifested form. There's actually no such thing as nothing, or no such thing as actual unmanifestation, but Krishna has a subtle energy, a subtle form of unmanifestation, where all things are kept in its subtle states before it becomes from the most subtle elements to the most gross and solid elements. So that we're also reading how the yogis, they meditate on the Rat Root, they meditate on Super Soul in the heart, and then the science of yoga, it's not known presently, but at least up to 5,000 years ago, they knew the science. They learned it from their spiritual master at an early age in Gurukul, where they can enter the earth into earth, and the water into water, and the fire into heat and light, into fire, and air. Merge the ahankara, the false ego, the false conception of self, into the aggregate of the Mahat Tattva, the cosmic ocean. And as pure spiritual soul, penetrate the coverings of the material universe. So it's stated that they go up to higher and higher planets, to cross the Milky Way, to go to Satyaloka. So even up to 5,000 years ago, or at least then from the descriptions of Srimad Bhagavatam, that the Milky Way was known. I guess the Milky Way is a galaxy. It has many different structures. Our specific solar system has the 9 planets and the sun. They're not sure about the other universes or the type of planetary systems that are contained within the Milky Way, but we're just a tiny little pin compared to the whole swirl. It's so large, it's so huge. So these things were known. Prabhupada was saying there's the Jyoti Shastras, or Maharaj was speaking about this, how the Vedas are voluminous. There's the Rig Veda, Atharva Veda, Sama Veda. There's the Dhanar Veda, the Veda, military arts. It literally means to throw arrows. And the Jyotir Veda, it gives accurate descriptions of the mathematical calculations to predict or to calculate the movements of the various planets and their specific constellations. And it's is even accurate up to the modern day. So they knew about the planets. They just had to. They want to do everything in their own way. They want to sit for themselves, right? Then theorize according to our limited sensual perception what they observe. But it's a limited sensual perception. We can't perceive the more subtle, fine energies. Although we know that there's a lot of forces at work, a lot of subtle energies. There's negative subtle energies. From what I've heard, they're stating, because I was kind of thinking exactly what they are, but persons in contaminated consciousness who are very, very sinful, they, they're prone to intoxication and meat eating and prone to fighting and arguing, gambling, deceit, cheating propensities. So they develop a specific, really polluted consciousness that something else kind of comes along. There's another kind of an entity, I'm not sure if it's like a ghost or some sort of something in the mind, or the Pushpa Purushas, the demon, the ghost that enters into the grains on the Ekadasi day. But they were saying there's something that feeds on negative energy, feeds on other people's fear and their negative emotions like that. So they like to make trouble. They were saying misery loves company, or birds of a feather flock together. So pious persons, the swan-like persons, they assembled together like at Sages Namar Saranya, or the members of the Krishna conscious movement. Jai Gaur Nitai Ki Jai, to hear about the Srimad Bhagavatam, hear about Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, Ramayana, hear the topics of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But those who are sinful, they make their associations, like at the bar. So it's ghostly haunted, and you can meet some really far out dangerous people who can get you in some pretty serious trouble if you get implicated with them deep enough. Some real heavy duty criminals like that. So not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, this element exists. So, they're saying is in comparison to today's yoga societies, Prabhupada was saying yoga is health, the nose pressing business. It's beneficial for the health, for a strong body. That's not the actual purpose of yoga. He's saying that the class that I listened to, he said that he knew a yoga instructor. And he was saying that they're practicing yoga so that they can digest better, digest their meat, digest their alcohol, and so they can be more healthier. He says this form of yoga, this is just taking them to hell. As formerly yoga was done differently. So this is and it's also mentioned that Sukadeva Goswami says that he is citing this just according to the Vedic version. And Prabhupada mentioned a couple of statements from the Puranas, and stating that the yogi leaves the material universe by the way of the Archie planets. Now that way I was remembering, I was going, there's the pastime where Vena Maharaj, he's a really demonic king. He was so ruthless. His father couldn't chastise him or correct him, so he was just simply disgusted, and he left home, went through the forest. And so there was no king in charge. So Vena was known for being really strong, powerful, even known for his cruelty. So the Brahmanas, they were thinking that Vena Maharaj would be just a suitable king to help curb the miscreants. But he was just a rascal rogue government. So the people were between a rock and a hard place, between a rogue government taking advantage of them on one hand, and the rogues and thieves taking advantage of the people on the other hand. So when King Vena was killed by the Brahmanas, and they turned his body, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, partial incarnation of Pritya Maharaj, he was born. He came from the good portions of King Vena. The negative portions of King Vena, that entity, he was sent to the forest and jungles to go live. Stay away from the pipeless, the people who just live in the hills. You're too much of a rascal. Right? And so then Pritya Maharaj's wife, her name was Archie. So that's why I remember this specific statement of the Vedas, of the Puranas, stating that the yogis, they leave the material world by the way of the Archie planets. That's also described as Sushumar. There's 14 planetary systems of Sushumar, and the Ganges flows on the Sushumar, the dolphin's abdomen. And so in Srimad Bhagavatam explains the different 14 planetary systems. I believe one of the planetary systems, like one of the dorsals of the fins, is the Forasvini Kumaras. So that's something that's not known by material science, especially not observable by external observation. The deities of the higher planets is the top of Anna, where the yogis can go in the forest and the heavenly planets to continue their yoga. And it's a yoga process that takes thousands of years. People live for 100,000 years. So the process is described in Bhagavad Gita. You're kind of thinking that this is kind of like your yoga session, or this is going to be like, for maybe a few years, maybe at most, in the jungles of the Himalayas, if you can bring your breathing into neutrality. That's what was this, Kumbhaka and Rakaka, bring your breathing into neutrality from through the nostrils for the in-breathing and out-breathing, and focus the mind at the top of the center of the forehead, meditating on super soul in the heart, sitting in a jungle in a secluded place, sitting on kushta grass or tiger skin, with a seat not too high or not too low. But we're not talking about, like a yoga session or a samadhi of a great yogi. You can do this maybe at least, for a couple of years, but let alone, for someone who can do this, for a few minutes or maybe an hour of meditation or so. But this is a meditation state to remain in for thousands of years to perfect this specific yoga. So that's not feasible. So in the age of Kali, the devotees have a special prerogative to directly associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the biomedium of the spiritual master, under the spiritual master's instructions, the way that Krishna wants to be approached. And instead of going in the indirect process of going to higher and higher planets and finally going to Brahma Loka for the duration of the remainder of Brahma's life, and then at the dissolution of the material universe, penetrate the coverings of material universes and enter either Brahman or Narayan planets, or Krishna Loka. But it's a direct, natural process and path directly engaging in devotional service. And in this way, associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Maharaj Brisket, in his questions, he makes a pretty good statement about how the devotees, they place the Supreme Lord on their hearts of their devotional love and their devotional service. On the flower, now the lotus flower within their hearts of devotion, like that. So that was a really nice statement. Your devotional relationship with the Lord is as if it's a lotus flower in your heart, and that's where you place the Lord. That's kind of charming. That's kind of really nice. So that's a nice statement. So, were there any other questions or comments? Okay, great. So, you have a question?
Hare Krishna. Thank you for sharing your realizations, Prabhu. Earlier, you were speaking about this verse in the Bhagavad Gita that if one wants to worship the demigods, then Krishna makes their faith steady. This question might seem silly, but is it appropriate for us to ask Krishna to make our faith steady in him and in the spiritual master?
Yeah, that was one of the discussions in the class that Maharaj gave in New Vrindavan in 1995. And Maharaj cited the example how the gopis, they worshipped goddess Katarani, a form of Durga, to have Krishna as their husband. So generally, young women who wish to have a good husband will worship Shiva Linga or goddess Katyani or worship Durga Devi or a good husband. But their motives was not a material motive, but it was a pure spiritual motive to have Krishna as their husband. So that example is given there. So, not that we're the worshippers of the demigods, but we say that even Ganesh, we have prayers where we have deities of Ganesh. Ganesh will remove the obstacles of our devotional service. So in that way, the demigods come into play. In fact, they're saying, Maharaj was saying that the demigods like Mother Durga, she was subordinate. Katyani was subordinate to even the gopis. That the gopis, they're expansions of Radharani. But goddess Katyani is an expansion and expansion and expansion and so forth, beginning from Radharani. It's the external energies, Samvit. There's the three energies. Haladini, Samvit, and Saladini. I believe it is Haladina, Saladina, and Samvit potencies. Now the spiritual and material worlds are being manifested through Krishna's internal and external energy. Krishna's external energy is an expansion, and so forth of the internal energy. So Goddess Katyani is happy to associate with such elevated souls as the gopis, to interact with them and to help to the gopis to achieve their desire by their worship, like that. So they're pleased to assist the devotees. So that's a good question. Yeah. So are there any other questions or comments? Or that's how we can end class there. Srimad Bhagavatam class Ki Jai.